Hi, my name is Becky Robinson, and I'm here today with Alison Eyring. And I'm so excited, Alison, to talk with you about the topics from your latest book, Pacing for Growth. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Becky.
I want to take a quick moment and help our watchers understand who you are, Alison. And Alison is a global thought leader on building organizational capacity for growth. She's the founder and chief executive officer. You know what? I'm going to stop. Hi, my name is Becky Robinson, and I'm here today with Alison Eyring. And Alison, I am so thrilled to have this opportunity to talk with you about your latest book, Pacing for Growth. I guess it's your first book, is that correct?
It's the first book that leaders would want to read. I did a dissertation and a thesis that only my committees read.
Got it. Well, it's been an exciting journey to watch you bring this book into the world, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I want to take a moment to help all of you who are watching understand who Alison is. So in addition to being the author of this new book, Pacing for Growth, Alison is also the founder and chief executive officer of Organization Solutions, which is based in Singapore. So Alison, what's it like to be an American working in Singapore?
Well, Singapore is a great place to live. It's a wonderful city. It's an island state, and it's very cosmopolitan. And it's very multicultural and has great food. So it's a great place for people from all over the world to live.
Well, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but as many of you might know, Alison is also an endurance athlete, and training in Singapore is an exceedingly great challenge that I can't even begin to think of. So I know you'll have some stories about that later on in our conversation.
Great.
Alison has been working with leaders to build organizational capacity for more than 25 years, and as such, she's a global thought leader. She's worked with a wide range of different global clients, and would you like to share with us a few of the clients that you've had the privilege of partnering with that your team has had the chance to serve?
Sure. Well, we work with mostly large multinational companies, companies like J&J and GE and Shell. We also work a lot in the technology sector, companies like Google and Microsoft. We work with some newer companies like Airbnb, for instance. So we work across industries.
Fantastic, thanks. Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I think that a great place to start would be for us to discuss the key idea in your book, which is intelligent restraint. Alison, could you explain for us what intelligent restraint is?
Sure. I think maybe the starting point is really in endurance training, because when you are training for a long run or a long race, what you have to do is build the capacity of your body to be able to go further and to go faster and not break down. And what I learned through over the 15 years of doing endurance training and competition is that if you want to do your best and you want to be not injured, that you've got to learn how to go as fast and far as you can, but then no more until you have the capacity to do so. And that is really a growth philosophy that's in my book that really can be applied to an organization, can be applied to a team, or just to an individual.
Thanks so much. Would you be willing to share with us some stories of some organizations that you've worked with and how this concept of intelligent restraint applies to some of their experiences?
Well, maybe I could share with you a bit of a Goldilocks story, and I'll give you the story of three different organizations. One that used not enough intelligent restraint, one that used one that used not enough restraint, one had too much restraint, and the one was kind of just right. Um, and I think it helps to illustrate what intelligent restraint is, because a lot of times people think that it's just about slowing down or having a slow pace, but in fact that's not what it is. So the first example that I would give you is of Samsung, and I think anyone that's listening to us will be familiar with the experience of the release of the Galaxy 7. Samsung's an organization that has been very successful, and it goes very fast. It's become very accustomed to being fast, but so much so that in its haste to release the Galaxy 7, it's really packing on a lot of features into this phone. It was a lot of functionality, but they ignored some of the basic requirements of the battery. And even early on, there were symptoms that there were problems, but they were in such a hurry to get it out in the market and to try to beat Apple that they ignored them. So they couldn't slow down to take stock of what was happening to fix it. And it was a flaming failure was that cost them billions and billions of dollars, and not only a recall of the product, but a complete stop of the product line. So Samsung's an example of an organization that needed restraint and it didn't, so that caused damage. Now you can compare that with a company like Kodak. Now Kodak is such a fabulous organization, and when I was growing up, Kodak was the king of photography. It was just this fantastic company. Even in 1975, it was so inventive that it created the digital camera. But it chose not to commercialize it. It didn't fully develop it and commercialize it because at the time it had about 90% of the market share in film and I think it was about 85% of the market share in cameras. So it was afraid that it was going to cannibalize its own products. And then what happens, of course, over the next 20 years, other competitors came into the market. They were much more agile, they were more aggressive, and Kodak was too constrained by their past success. And so, unlike Samsung, what Kodak needed to do was to not be so constrained by what it had made it successful and to push and to go faster and farther. Of course, we know the story that Kodak, around the financial crisis at that time, it was starting to sell off its patents, and then by 2012 it went to Chapter 11 and basically sold off most of the business. So it does still exist now, and it's much more focused, and I think it will be again a good story because it's a great company. But it really needed to go faster. It needed to show less constraint. Now, another example, so this is like the porridge story. One was too hot, one was too cold. And I think Muji is just a great story of an organization that seems to have a philosophy of finding this pace. And Muji is a Japanese retailer. It's a very unique, and even the name of Muji, it literally stands for no brand quality goods. And so it's trying to do this strange combination of having really good quality products but not do it at a high price. And what Muji does is it's a little like Trader Joe's in that it has its own branded products. It has fabulous merchandising. It has a range of goods, some food, some clothes, some perfumes, and it really creates this great in-store experience. And one of the things that it does is that it deliberately chooses not to advertise. And one of the reasons why it doesn't is twofold. One is that it doesn't want to advertise because that would increase its costs, and it's committed to providing high quality at a low cost. And it also wants to grow at a pace that it can execute. And because the store experience is so part of what Muji is, it doesn't want to threaten that. And so I think Muji is an example of an organization that it's changing, it's growing quite successfully, but it's very targeted about where it wants to go and about continuing to be true to its brand promise.
So that's really helpful to have kind of this range of organizations representing the idea of intelligent restraint. On the one hand, a company that went too fast, on the other hand, a company that went too slow, and then trying to figure out what the exact, right pace is.
Right.
In order to understand that a little bit more fully, I would love it, Alison, if you could explain some of the principles of intelligent restraint that might help us as we try to consider how to apply this in our own organizations.
Sure. Let me step back a little bit because the principles of intelligent restraint really come from understanding how the body changes and how the body builds up endurance capacity. And so there's three principles. The first one is about maximum capacity, and the principle is that capacity defines how far and fast you can go. And in sports, it's easy to understand capacity, right? I mean, you can know your maximum heart rate, you can know how fast you can go. And often before you start a race, you'll do baseline measurements of your capacity. And in endurance training, that's really important because you want to understand what your maximum capacity is. Then you can build a training plan that helps you get to it. But in business, we often don't really think about it that way. You know, we understand how we're doing today. We have goals for the future, but we're not really thinking about what's maximum capacity. What does that mean for us, and how are we performing that we're compared to what we could be performing, and then what is that going to be in the future? So that's really this upper limit of performance, and that's different from capabilities, which are really about the ability to or the power to execute something. And so if you've got the right capabilities, they will increase capacity. And again, if you think about sports, one of the principles in any kind of sport is that you want to train in a sport specific way. And that's the same way in an organization, is that whatever the strategy is of the business, that's going to drive certain capabilities that we need. Um, at the
Mm.
same time, there's certain general capabilities that I talk about in the book that come out of research, like external orientation, for instance, the ability to be looking up and looking out and understanding what's happening outside, and then bringing that in. And then the third principle is around pace, and pace is so important. Um, our bodies are really interesting because our bodies love balance and homeostasis, right? And so if we always go at the same pace, we don't improve. And so a lot of times when people see the title Pacing for Growth, they're thinking, slow and steady. And I'm like, no, 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 it's not slow and steady. I mean, if you're running an 100K run, you'll go slower at the beginning because you don't want to spend all your energy. So there's this principle of conservation. But at the same time, when you're training, you want to vary your pace because different paces serve a different purpose. And sometimes you go really intense, sometimes you do a recovery run. And in business, we also need to learn how to use different paces to accomplish different purposes. Sometimes we want to slow down because we want to learn and reflect from an experience. Other times we want to go faster because that creates challenge that can help us develop capabilities that we need.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit more about pace, Allison, because I know that you and I have talked previously about your endurance athletics training and how pace comes into that. Can you help me understand how a leader can set the pace in their organization? And, what recommendations might you have when there's a mismatch, perhaps, between the pace that seems to be required and the pace that people are approaching, a process with?
Well, one of the things that I think we observe very often in our coaching practice with leaders is that sometimes the leaders are going so fast that they aren't bringing people along with them. And I think the more the organization feels that they have to go faster, which these days I think it's very common. People have this sense of we've got to go faster and faster. I think
Yeah, do
sometimes,
more with less.
yeah, it's like better, and that people talk about the VUCA world, and I do think the world is going faster and there is more change. The question is, are we really exerting on what matters most? And I think a lot of times we're just really busy. We're just doing a lot of things as opposed to thinking about what really matters. So I think as leaders we get sucked into this sometimes, and then we end up going so fast that we're not bringing others along. And then when we do that, we're not building their capabilities. So then that increases the gap, and then our people can't step up and be able to do more. And this is really a huge issue in growing organizations because you know if you're in a really high growth organization, for instance, um, when you start your job, you think you know what your role is, but 3 months later it's changed, and you a year later it's very different. So you have to be growing at least as fast as the job is growing in order to be able to continue to sustain that growth.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's challenging, I'm sure, for anyone. Allison, would you share a story with us from your athletic training that addresses this issue of pace?
Well, I would think that my favorite story that I like to share on pace, I kind of go back to the early days when I first started running because I just love running. I love running long, slow distances. And when I first trained for my first 100K, nothing would make me happier than to get up in the dark and go out and run on trails all day long. Now, my family didn't love this, but this was like the greatest thing.
All
And
day long, like how many hours,
I could
Alison?
run, oh my gosh, I could run sunrise to sunset. I mean, the longest distance I ran in my training was 80 kilometers. And I think that pretty much took me all day. It took me two changes of clothing. I do remember that. And
Because you're
so
running in the heat, right?
so in Singapore, the center of the island is there's all these reservoirs, and around the reservoirs are trails, and so you're in the jungle. It's actually quite covered, and so that's where usually I would run. I'd be in the jungle, mostly covered, but very, very hot, and running on trails and old dried out water riverbeds. So what happened over time was because I was going this really slow distance, like the mechanics of my body changed. I didn't use a big pace. My legs would go little steps, and I didn't because I was running so much. I just stopped stretching. I was too busy, and so I started getting more and more tight in my hips. And my IT band that runs from the hip to the knee was really, really tight. And so my body started to become accustomed to this pace, and it actually became like an architecture for a slow person, right? So I remember 2 weeks before my race, I was out, like I had been tapering, so I wasn't going as far, and I had like a 40K run, and I was about 5 kilometers from the where my car was parked. So I'm coming back, very hot and sweaty. I was wearing this camel pack because you're out in the jungle, you need to be carrying water and food and stuff like that. And I would eat these goo bars and put them in my pack. So I really must have smelled like a buffet lunch to the uh, to the animals in the jungle. And I was running down this dried out riverbed, and I suddenly saw this big monkey in front of me, and I'm really scared of these monkeys because they carry some really yucky diseases, and this one was a big one. He was very scary to me. So he's sitting there, and I said, okay, I'm gonna just keep going. I'm gonna be strong and courageous. And I kind of trot along, and suddenly I hear him go, "Wah!" And he screeches. And I went, "Wah!" And I screamed, and I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. And then I felt this piercing pain in my calf, and I was certain that the monkey had bit me. But it turned out that I had simply torn the belly of my calf. I
Wow.
physically ripped my calf with this explosive speed like a gazelle to escape the monkey. And I learned that a very important lesson that day, which was that you can't run like a gazelle when you train like a donkey. And that was an important lesson for me about pace.
Yeah, can you say that again? I want to make sure that our listeners or watchers hear that.
My gazelle quote that
Yes, that quote. It's such
can't
a
run
quotable
like a
quote.
I love it. It's you can't run like a gazelle when you train like a donkey. And the context is, because I was so slow, I was so proud of myself. I'd say to people, I'm like a donkey. I'd say, I might not be fast, but I can go really, really far. And I thought that was a strength. And then what I learned was that it actually became a liability because it prevented me from being fast. And later, when I learned how to train properly, I learned that actually I could be kind of fast. In perspective, I'm not a fast person. But in my age category, I'm okay.
So, can you apply that quote about the gazelle and the donkey to an organizational setting? How might we get into trouble if we don't train our organization to go at different speeds?
Well, you think about, nowadays we work with a lot of organizations that have been using agile as a methodology to go faster. And it used to be that if you think about like development of software, you would do all the programming and you'd work for a really long time and you'd get it all perfect and then you'd release it and you'd make sure you had all the bugs taken out and then over time you might do different versions. And that's really changed now. And so most software development is done in a very little modular way. Things are released in a beta format, and they're improved by users touching them and interacting with them. And that whole approach has then been applied, is more and more being applied in organizations. And I think that's actually a wonderful example of organizations learning to pace themselves in a different way. And I will say it also brings a lot of problems because a lot of organizations, they're not accustomed to dealing with that rate of change. You think about if you're in a software company and let's say you sell a software that gets updated once a year. Well, it's relatively easy for your sales force to understand what the changes are and to communicate that. You can educate your channel partners. They can go and they can prepare people. When you're starting to do frequent releases, it's much more difficult. So you have to become faster in how you communicate. You have to become faster in how you resolve conflicts because you're going to have a lot more touch points in the organization. So really, you need a different architecture of the organization in order to deal with that kind of speed.
That's really helpful. So, can you apply this intelligent restraint idea to nonprofits, and how might that be different?
Mm. I really believe that the idea of intelligent restraint can be applied to any system because the body is a system. But actually, the body is a structure of 12 different systems that are all interconnected. Um, Nonprofits also are systems that, as organizations. Now, they don't have a profit motive, and they're paying some people, but often the bulk of work, a lot of the work is being done by volunteers. Um, and so I think the principles are still the same. One of the things I talk about in the book is around having an abundance mindset because if you're trying to drive execution of the day-to-day business and you're also trying to build capabilities for the future and not kill people, you've got to really have this mindset that says, wow, I can develop anyone, anytime, anywhere, and in a frugal way. And I think that philosophy really applies to organizations with a volunteer. Not workforce, but with a lot of volunteers, because it's very common within volunteer-based organizations to start to rely on just a few people. And because you find the people that volunteer, they get everything done. And that's a really important part of leadership in those types of organizations is really ensuring that you have enough people that have enough capabilities that you're not burning people out because then they don't want to continue to volunteer, even though they're very motivated and passionate about helping.
Do you have any examples to demonstrate what you talked about being ready and able to develop anyone, anytime, anywhere?
Yeah, and there's a number of things that I talk about in chapter 8. That's the chapter on scale to grow. Well, one of them is around having routines in place that can trigger development. And one type of routine, I call it a moment of truth. And a moment of truth is a time when you interact with some important stakeholder, and that could be a customer, it could be a channel partner, it could be a senior leader. Um, and so a routine that leverages a moment of truth is where you become aware of the fact that this experience is going to happen and you leverage it to help develop the person that is involved in it. And an example that I gave in the book is of a leader that I worked with, and she's just fabulous. And one of the things that she does is she works in an organization where it's very important for people to have visibility with senior management and to present well and to communicate well. And one of the things that she does is whenever she has meetings with more senior leaders, she'll bring somebody in the organization into that meeting. And before she goes into the meeting, she meets with them. She talks to them about what's going to happen. and about their role and how they can participate and show up at the meeting. And then they do it, and then afterwards they debrief. And I love that she just has this routine in place that every time there's an opportunity, she brings someone along and she helps develop them. So I think we have, as leaders, we have so many opportunities like that where we can help to develop people, leveraging practice and experience.
That's a great example. Thank you. So, can you tell me a little bit about the three rules of intelligent restraint?
Yeah, these, when I wrote the book, actually at the very beginning, this is what I was thinking about the most because in endurance training, there's these wonderful rules of thumb that help you ramp up and ramp down your volume. And you know that because you're a marathon runner yourself, right? So you've
Yes.
got the 10% rule, right? And the 10% rule says you don't increase say your weekly mileage or the mileage of your longest run more than say 10% in a week. Super helpful rule of restraint. Now, in business, we don't have those rules of restraint. I mean, certainly business has lots of rules like you don't lie, cheat, steal, divulge confidential information. So, but they're all about restraining us from doing bad things. And so it seemed to me that what we needed was to help leaders make trade-offs so that they could know when should they focus on one thing and not the other. And again, it kind of comes back to this idea that today leaders have to be able to drive execution of the day-to-day business at the same time they're building capabilities for the future and not killing everybody. And so that's what the rules of intelligent restraint are about. It's about helping leaders find the right trade-offs.
So, let's talk a little bit about the first one, focus overrules vision.
Yeah, this is one I really love this one. And I use an example from my own experience because I will say that I had a vision of doing a marathon in the 90s. In fact, I remember going to see the Dallas Marathon. My husband and I went with some friends, and Harry and I stood at the finish line and cheered people on, and we were so excited and so inspired seeing people cross the finish line, and really had this vision that we would run a marathon, and we shook hands on it. Um, but that vision kind of faded, right? The years went by, life intervened, and when I first did my first marathon, it was really at a time in my life when I was grieving the loss of my parents. And so I chose to run the marathon because it would give me hope. And any sports person will tell you that hope is not a very good strategy. It got me through the first one, but subsequent to that, what got me to the finish line was focus. And focus helped me say, what's the race I want to be in? What is it what does success look like? What do I have to do to succeed? And then by getting that kind of clarity, I could prioritize and align my life and resources with it. That same set of behaviors are what we saw in our growth leader research, which was that we examined a number of leaders across different companies, and we also had financial data on their companies and saw who had grown the business and who had not. And there was a huge difference in the leaders that grew the business and those who didn't. And those who really could deliver growth over a period of time really had focus. Now, I will say everybody had vision, the high growth leaders and the no growth leaders. But the growth leaders drove focus in the organization, and they drove it so that they could get priorities. And priorities are so important because priorities allow us to constrain certain things. They allow us to say no. And just like, I always tell people, strategy is only good if it helps you say no. And focus is the same. If we can't learn to say no to some things and allocate resources to others, it's very difficult to cross the finish line. So
Thanks.
that's a
So, how about this one? Routines beats strengths. How can a leader apply that rule to their organization?
Well, I was telling you my gazelle and donkey metaphor of, I think the problem that I was in was that I was really over relying on what I thought was my strength of sort of long, slow distance running. And that's very common in organizations. And it's common for us as humans. We like to focus on our strengths, but in order to achieve this this duality of execution and growth, we really need to have more faith in routines than we do our strengths. We need to learn how to have disciplines of practice. We need to learn how to use routines to just conserve energy, um, and use routines to build the capabilities that we need to grow. A lot of times strengths limit us because they make us want to keep doing the same thing over and over. And what we know is that if we do that too much, it constrains us from changing the way that we need to. So routines are kind of cool in that way, in that they can both conserve energy as well as help us build new capabilities.
That's helpful. Thank you. And how about this one? Exert, then recover. I imagine there must be some stories in your athletic background that speak to this one.
I do. One of my favorite things I love to tell people about is when I finished my first half Ironman. That was probably the hardest race I ever did. And I'm going to be doing another one this year, so I'm a little bit scared of it because it's also in the mountains, which is going to be hard for me. But it took me more than 7 hours to do, and I was so tired at the end. I remember my husband and my girls, who were pretty young at the time, came. They wrapped me up in a towel. They dumped me in the car. They took me home. My husband, he so lovingly filled a tub with ice, because that's what I will do if I've gone out and run for many hours. As I'm so hot and tired, and I have inflammation in your joints, and so an ice tub is great for that. And then I went, I got out. My daughters had created a little spa, and I lay there, and I think they massaged me, but I don't really know because I fell asleep. I was so tired. Got up, ate a big old pasta meal, and then went back to bed. And I love to say that was recovery, right? Um, that's the kind of recovery we think about when we talk about recovery at work. And I will say, it's a type of recovery. It's called passive recovery, and it's important. So passive recovery helps us rest and restore energy, almost like as if we were a battery. So it recharges that battery. But it's only half of recovery. The other half is active recovery. And in training, we use active recovery. We run slower. We're running at a lower heart rate. It's less intense. We're healing, and we're conditioning our body to go further. And I think that's what we're often missing in organizations, is learning how to use active recovery to help improve. And that's a really important thing for us to remember, is that when we train, we don't get better when we're running. We get better when we stop running, or when we run slower, because it's during recovery that we heal and that we improve. And so if we're at work, if we're going, like kind of like a hamster in a cage, running, and never stopping, kind of mindlessly exerting, we will not get better. We will just burn ourselves out.
So, can you share some examples of what active recovery might look like in the workplace?
Sure. Well, I'll give you an example of an organization that we work with that is once a quarter. There's a lot of activity around design of future products. And so there's a lot of meetings. People are traveling from around the world. They're getting together. They're figuring out. They're bringing supply together with marketing. It's very intense. And one of the things that one of the leaders has done that I think is great is he talks about, so the ramp up is a time to develop people because it provides progressively challenging experiences. And then there's the peak, and during the peak it's just all hands on deck. Just we're going to do it as best we can. And then as they come off the peak, they have a few days where there's no meetings, because they know they need to catch up.
Mhm.
So I think that's a great example. But any organization, and like any sales organization, for instance, they have a rhythm. And it might be a monthly rhythm, it might be a quarterly rhythm. And the more that they can learn to intentionally follow that cadence and leverage sort of some of the key challenging experiences for development, but then come off of the peaks and reflect and learn from that, then the better they're going to get at being able to pace themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that in your book, you talk a lot about managing energy and how that's an important part of intelligent restraint. So, how could a leader effectively model how to manage and replenish energy?
Well, um, there's really a number of things leaders can do. One is that they can, or I shouldn't say they, because I also lead an organization, so it's we. I also struggle with these things.
Mhm.
So the first thing we can do is exert less. And we can exert less by being very thoughtful about what we ask people to do and what we ourselves do. And to really keep coming back to this question of what really matters and what is it that we need to focus on that's going to have the most impact. And sometimes we also get sucked into this feeling that, I got to be great and everything, I've got to be perfect. And one of the things I say in the book is that I think what we've got to do is figure out what is it that we drive focus on and do that really well. And then let's just let good enough be good enough in some of the other things and allow ourselves to be good enough and allow others and help them understand that that's okay. Because we can't be perfect in everything. So that's one. Another way that leaders can help people manage their energy is with this area of active recovery and just helping people become mindful about what their level of exertion is. One of the things that I'll ask my people is I'll just say, how are you? Like I'll just say, if it's 100% is where you are like saying, oh my gosh, if I don't take a day off, I'm just going to pass out. Where are you on that? It's just having a language to talk about, where am I? And if somebody says they're above 80%, that's a warning sign because that's feeling really intense. Um, the other thing that we can do is help people find the right balance between the demands of their job and the resources available. And there's a lot of research that says that when people can balance that, then they're more engaged in their work. Well, that's what we want. We want people to be engaged, to be excited about what they're doing and loving what they're doing because that gives us passion and energy for what we do. Too often
Sure.
we're asking people to do more and more, but we're not taking things off their plate and helping them also get the resources that they need.
That's
So
very
those are a
helpful.
few ways that I think we can help people manage energy and talk
I think
about it.
for sure. Well, I think that, thinking about there's that excitement at the start of the race. And I imagine you've experienced this, Allison, that sometimes you can get caught up in the excitement of the race and run too fast. And so the more experience you have, the more you can really pay attention and slow yourself down to conserve that energy for later, as you mentioned earlier. And it can be that way in an organization. In my experience, that you get caught up in the excitement of something new. But if you can model kind of the slowing down so that you have the energy across a longer period of time, it can help.
I think that is a really great comment, Becky. I can still remember one of my first experiences working with a Japanese multinational company. And, as an American, I'm used to, I'm very comfortable with ambiguity. I'm used to going fast. Everything doesn't have to be planned out. And I remember working with this organization, and we were doing a very large scale transformation. And I remember talking to the leader, and we would be talking through. Our team would be there, and we'd be reviewing the plan, and he would sort of breathe in you to his teeth. You could tell that there was a concern, and he'd say, "Allison, son, what are we going to do?" Da, 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 da. He'd ask me all these detailed questions, and initially I'd say, "Oh my gosh, it's driving me crazy. We're going so slow. We're never going to get it done." But what I learned from him was that actually we went faster in the end because we really thought about what is it that we're doing, who are the stakeholders, how do we engage them, are we clear in our mind what's really important, what are we going to do if this thing doesn't work, what's our plan B. And so in the end it was actually a very successful change, and it was faster than other changes that I've been involved in where we got off to a much faster start. So sometimes you go slow to go fast.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Um, I know that in the book you outline these 7 practices of intelligent restraint, and I'm specifically most interested in hearing about this idea of scale to grow. Um, so would you share with us a little bit, Allison, about, how scale can help you grow?
Sure. Well, when I use the language of scale to grow, I'm really talking about scaling people. And so when I talk about it, it's about how do you grow people faster and more cost effectively. And because, we can all pour more money into classroom training, but that's expensive, and the research shows that that's not always the most impactful way of developing people. So with scale to grow, that it's a whole that's what I mentioned earlier about having this abundance mindset, which is about thinking that we can develop anyone, anytime, anywhere. And um, then so if we have that mindset that we're going to develop it, that we can develop anyone, anyone, time, anywhere, then what we have to then do is create routines that will allow us to help people to grow and accelerate their development through experience. And too often we say those words, we've been saying it for 20 years, that experience is the greatest teacher, right? And a lot of companies say, oh, we use the 70-20-10 rule, and if you ask them, well, what does that mean? That it means that they have a development plan, and 70% is experience, 20 is through others, and 10% is classroom training. But I really think that we have to shift our mindset. That's not how we're going to maximize development of people um, through experience. Part of we need to. If you look at the first principle about understanding capacity, we have to help. We have to first define, well, so what's maximum capacity in the organization, the team, for the individual. Where are they performing today versus what they could be, and then what's that? How do they help develop themselves to get more of that? And then what are the practices that they can implement in their jobs that can trigger their development? So leaders play a really, really important role in this, because we have to role model and coach people so that they can scale themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. So how much of this really, Allison, do you think starts with individuals understanding these concepts, and how much is more about applying the principles to an organization wide?
Well, I've always believed that you should grow wherever you're planted, and I think that if you are, let's say you're an individual contributor and you're not in a position where you're controlling resources, you can still influence and persuade. So what I think is that as an individual, you can think about all these concepts for yourself. If you're a project leader, you can be thinking about these concepts for your project. So it's sort of, if you're managing a function, you can think about these for the function of the team. So wherever you are in the organization, there's concepts here that are useful to you. What I do see in my work is that the concept of maximum capacity for an organization is one that really resonates with senior level executives. When I talk with people that are, say, a team leader, they really get excited about the concept of scale to grow because they really see that that's important. And definitely the concept of energy, it resonates with everybody. So, and especially in the technology sector, we do a lot of work with companies that are pretty high growth and transforming very quickly. And a lot of people are very tired and feeling kind of burned out. And so I think for a lot of people, they really gravitate to this concept of, how can I manage my energy? How can I help others manage their energy? Because, this, we're the only one we got for the rest of our life. And so we want to be around and healthy and happy for the long haul.
Definitely. So I'm wondering, Allison, as we wrap up our conversation today, if there are any other stories from your training that might help bring these ideas together for those who are listening.
Well, I would love to share this one example. This was from the second 100K that I trained for. The race was in Mongolia, and That year, I was involved in some work in Botswana, which is a fabulous country. And I ran in Botswana. Botswana is a bit like West Texas, so it's very hot and it's flat. And so I did my 30, my 50, my 80K runs in Botswana. So that was very fun, and I ran with lots of people and just had a great experience. Then the race itself was in Mongolia. It was so far north that we could see Siberia. It was in the mountains, and it was cold. And I was destroyed by the mountains that I had to run. And in fact, in spite of having trained and I had the distance, I was strong, I wasn't injured, I was feeling confident. I didn't complete the 100K. And I didn't complete it because I hadn't trained the right way. And my lesson learned was you got to train for the right race.
Mm.
And so that's what I would leave people thinking about today is we all know the race we've been on, and we all know what we're racing today. The question is, what's your next race? And how is it going to be different from today's race? And let's make sure that we train for that.
Wow, Allison, that is such a great takeaway as we wrap up this time together. And I want to make sure that anyone watching or listening is aware of the great work that you're doing in the world, including your book, which is obviously now available on Amazon, and also the Intelligent Restraint community on Facebook, where lots of people from organizations are coming together to share their stories. And then again, your organization, the one that you lead organizationsolutions.com. So for anyone who's watching this or listening to this, I hope that you'll take the time to get to know Allison's organization. And one of the things that you'll find at organizationsolutions.com is a test that you can take to see how you and your organization are pacing for growth. So Allison, thank you for this amazing conversation, and I look forward to learning from you in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Becky. It's been a pleasure.